Today I'm going to teach you guys all about materials in Unreal Engine. This video is for beginners and intermediate users, because by the end we're all going to be experts. To follow along, you just need any 3D model with finished textures. If you want to use the exact same model as me, go over to ProductionCrate and search for gun, and then click on Show Free. And we're going to use this free Desert Eagle model. I'm going to start by showing you just how to plug in textures in a basic way in Unreal Engine to get it looking the way you expect. Then we're going to talk about some edge cases, like how to handle transparency or UDIMs. And then I'm going to finish off by showing you how to use material instances to create adjustable sliders for yourself so that you can art direct your materials later without having to dig back into the node graph. I know that sounds complex, but I promise this video is for beginners, and by the end, you're going to be an expert at it. All right, let's jump over to Unreal. All right, so here we are in Unreal Engine, and what we're gonna do is import and set up just a basic asset, nothing fancy. So a quick note about Unreal Engine, if you don't see the content browser at the bottom, just hit Control Space and it'll pop up. And if you want to, you can click Dock and Layout over here on the right, and then it will stay in the window. But I'm gonna go to my content folder, and I'm gonna right click, create a new folder for myself. You can call it whatever you want. I'll call it Crate Tutorial. And we're going to be importing a few different assets, so I think I'm also going to create a subfolder called gun. Okay, and then I'm going to import my gun into this subfolder. You can do that either by clicking import right here, or you can actually just drag and drop the OBJ directly into the folder like this. Now, when this window pops up, don't just press OK. There's a few things we want to look at. In this case, I'm going to go to the Static Meshes tab, and I'm going to scroll down and find this button right here that says Combine Static Meshes, and I'm going to turn that on. Sometimes you don't want to do that if you want your model to have moving parts, but in this case, I just want it to be one piece. Then I'll press Import, and we get a model and a material. Now, because it's an OBJ, it comes with this really weird sort of default material, like a placeholder material. So we're going to have to fix that too. But first, let's import all of our textures. So I'm going to go into the maps folder, and I'll select everything except the height. We don't really need the height map right now. And let's drag and drop these into the folder as well. Okay, the first thing we want to do is highlight the maps. And you'll notice in this little pop-up dialog box, there's a little section that says sRGB true or false. sRGB means it's being color corrected, and we don't want all of our maps to be color corrected. Basically, only the maps that are color should be color corrected. So I'm going to select all of the textures that are not color maps, like metallic, ambient occlusion, and roughness, and I'll right click, go up to Asset Actions, down to Edit Selection in Property Matrix, and when this window pops up, we can just really quickly and conveniently turn off the sRGB checkbox for all three of those textures and press Save. Now, the other thing, there are two different types of normal maps out there. There's an OpenGL normal map and a DirectX normal map. Programs like Blender like OpenGL normal maps, whereas Maya and Unreal Engine and a bunch of other programs like DirectX normal maps. The only difference is the green channel is inverted. So on OpenGL maps, if you look at just the green channel, it looks like the light is coming from above. And on DirectX, if you look at the green channel, it looks like the light's from below. So if you're working with a model that was created in Blender and created to look good in Blender, it's not going to look right in Unreal Engine. So we also need to invert the green channel. So I'm going to click on my normal map, and I'm going to search for the word green and just click on Flip Green Channel right here, and we'll press Save. Okay, let's hit Control-Shift-S to save everything, and now we can finally fix this ugly, weird material. Double click on the material, and when you import models that are made in other programs like an FBX or an OBJ, sometimes Unreal Engine creates all these weird nodes to help you sort of convert those materials into Unreal Engine materials. We actually don't need any of this stuff, so we can just select it all and trash it. Okay, and then let's drag and drop all of our textures into this window here. Okay, so now we have all of our texture samples, and they're kind of just on top of each other. We'll spread them out. If you click on one and you're not sure which one it is, you can look right over here on the left. We can see Desert Eagle Normal. So this is the normal map. So I'm going to grab the RGB channel and drag and drop it into the normal channel here in the material. If I click here, I can see this one's called Mixed AO, which is short for ambient occlusion. So we'll scroll down kind of to the bottom, let's get all this out of the way. And this is going to be plugged into ambient occlusion. This one here is roughness. So we'll plug this one into roughness. This one here is the base color. Drag and drop that into base color. And this one is metallic. So we'll drop that into metallic. Now, it's probably a good idea to untangle these nodes. And we can see that the material over here looks a little bit weird, and that's because by default it's translucent. So we want to fix that as well. So I'm going to click on the material and change the blending mode from translucent to opaque. I don't know why it sets materials to translucent by default, but it does. All right, let's just go ahead and press save and close this window. And now our gun should look the way we expect. All right, now let's do something a little more complicated, something with transparency. So again, you can use whatever model you want. I'm going to use one of these characters from character.productioncrate.com. And again, I'm only going to use free models for this video. So I'm going to build a little character and make sure that some of the options I choose have transparency, like this race car helmet. Notice it has a glass visor. Now it looks kind of weird, but that's just because it's running on the web. It's kind of just a preview. It's going to look a lot better in Unreal Engine. And maybe I'll just give him a blue shirt real quick. Now if we go down to the downloads at the bottom, we can give him a name. I'll just call him Biker Dude. And if you have a pro account, you can actually just download an Unreal UPack and all the materials will be set up correctly already, so you don't have to do any of the rest of this video. But for us free users, or if you're using an external model from some other program, you're gonna probably have an FBX. Now here where it says normal format, this is what I was talking about with the inverted normal map when we were setting up the gun. So if you're downloading for Blender, you wanna use OpenGL, but for Maya or Unreal Engine, you wanna use DirectX. And if you have a free account, you can download LOD2, which is the lowest resolution model, and it's done. We just built a game character. Now if we jump back over into Unreal Engine, we can set up a new folder for this guy. So back in my PCrate tutorial folder, I'll make a new subfolder called Biker Dude, and I'll just drag and drop him right into here. Notice when you do that, it creates a new folder called bikerdude.fbm. This folder is going to contain all of your textures. Now they should import into Unreal Engine when you drag the FBX in, but in case they don't, they're all right here if anything goes wrong. So over here on the import content window, I'm just going to press import, and you can see that this guy's got a lot of textures and a lot of materials. Let's drag and drop him out into the scene. And we can see that it tried to set up the materials properly, but because this is an FBX and not a native Unreal file, the materials don't quite look right. So that's why if you have a pro account, I actually recommend you just download the Unreal UPack file instead of an FBX. So once again, for us free users, we're gonna have to set this up manually. So first things first, we need to click here and search for Roughness, and we're gonna turn off sRGB for all those roughness textures. So just like before, I'm going to right click and go Asset Actions, Edit Selection and Property Matrix, and we'll press Ctrl A to select all these. And there's actually a quicker way to do this than clicking all these little checkboxes for the sRGB setting. Over here in the search, we can just search for sRGB and just uncheck it once over here, and they all uncheck really quickly. So I'll press Save. And we just want to do the same thing for the metalness textures and any textures that have the word alpha. Now we don't have to invert the green channel in the normal maps because we downloaded the DirectX version, so we know it's going to be right. Okay, so I went ahead and I plugged in most of his materials the exact same ways we did with the gun. Nothing special. But this glass visor is transparent, and so we have to set up the material a little bit differently. So I'm going to search for the word glass, and here's the race car helmet glass material. Let's open that up. And just like before, I'm going to trash all the nodes that are in there already. And this material actually uses the textures for the helmet accessories. So I'll search for the word accessories, and we'll grab these 5 textures and drop them into the graph. Just kind of separate them out. We'll start plugging them in. So here's the base color. This one is the metallic, normal, roughness. And then this last one here, if you roll over, it says alpha. So this goes into opacity, but I can see that the opacity channel is grayed out. I'm going to plug it in anyway. And then we need to change the way this material reacts with the light. So I'm going to click on the material, and here where it says blend mode opaque, we're going to change this to translucent. And then here where it says shading model default lit, we're going to change this to thin translucent. Now we get these warnings here at the bottom, and it says thin translucent materials have to use the lighting mode called surface forward shading. So that's right here, translucency, lighting mode, and we'll change this to surface forward shading. And now this error says that thin translucent materials need a thin translucent material output node. So we need to make one. So I'll just search for thin translucent material output, and I'm just going to plug a solid color into here. Now the quickest way to get a solid color is to hold down 3 and click, and you get a solid color. I'm just going to start with neutral gray by default, and then we'll plug this into transmittance color. Next, let's just go ahead and save, and we should see it update on the model. So now we've got a glass material with some options to art direct the look of it. Okay, now a slightly different version of transparency than glass is masked materials. So that's for things like hair or this chainmail, where the missing parts are not a transparent material, they're just not supposed to be there at all, the space between the chain links. So there's a slightly different way of setting those up. So I've got this transparency map, this alpha map for the chainmail, but I'm not going to set it up the same way I did the glass. In this case, I'm going to click on my material, and where it says blend mode opaque, instead of choosing translucent, I'm going to choose masked. And then I'll plug my alpha into the opacity mask channel of the material and press apply. And you can see it's working. Now, a lot of masked materials are intended to be paper thin, like this chainmail or like hair cards. So a lot of the time, it's also a good idea to select your material and then go right here where it says two-sided and click on that and press update. And now we can see the back of the chainmail as well. By the way, this character was also made on the character.productioncrate.com. Just click on the skeleton warriors body type and you can make an entire army of undead warriors. Okay, so now we're ready to level up our materials. We're going to take it a little bit farther. We're going to try to give ourselves and anyone we're working with more control over materials so we can art direct on the fly. So I'm going to go to ProductionCrate and I'm going to search for new. And let's jump over to the 3D category. I'm also going to click on show free. That way you guys can follow along with me even if you have a free account. Feel free to use whatever model you want. I'm going to click on the spaceship because we can learn a lot of really cool advanced tricks with the way this spaceship is set up. So I'm actually going to download the 4K version, and when you download it, this is what you get. There's a USDC, and there's an FBX, and then there's a folder full of textures, like a lot of textures. But if we look at the way they're named, they have this funny little number at the end, 1001, 1002, and so on. You can see there's actually 4 base color textures, 4 emissive textures, and 4 of everything. That little number shows that they're using something called UDIMs, which is like UV tiles. The UVs are so big they actually go outside of the usual square that you want to contain your UVs within. So I'm going to show you how to set up a texture that uses UVs in Unreal Engine, and then I'm also going to show you how to add lots of cool controls to your materials like contrast, brightness, and tint, so you can art direct on the fly. So before we import those textures, we want to make sure that our project supports virtual texture streaming. So just go up to Edit, Project Settings, and search for Virtual Texture Streaming, and make sure that this one that says Enable Virtual Texture Support is checked. If it's not checked, just turn it on. You'll probably have to restart your engine, but once you do, you'll be ready to go. Okay, I'm going to make a new folder inside of my pcrate folder called Spaceship, and I'll drag and drop the FBX into the folder. Now, I'm not just going to press OK. I'm going to go to Static Meshes and make sure that Combined Static Meshes is checked. I'm also going to go to Textures, and I'm going to turn off Import Textures, just because this is kind of a unique setup and I don't want the computer to mess up. I want to do it manually. So I'm going to press Import and wait for a second because it's a pretty big file. So now we get one material and one model. Let's drag this model out into the scene. Then I'll make a subfolder for textures, and I'm going to select every first texture. So where it says base color 1001, I'll grab that one. I'll grab emissive 1001, metallic, normal, and so on. And we'll drag and drop this into the folder. If you get this warning, press no, and we can see that it imported all of our textures. And if you look in the bottom right corner of the texture thumbnail, it says VT for virtual texture. That's how you know it worked. So it actually imported all of the textures based on those numbers, even though we only selected the first one, 1001. And if I double click on this first one here, which is the base color, I can look at the entire thing and I can see it's actually 4 textures next to each other combined into one. So up here in the top right, you can see that it says imported 2K by 2K, but it's 4 by 1. So it's 4 2K maps next to each other. And the total size is 8K by 2K. So it's a really big texture. So that's how you work with UDIMs in Unreal Engine. It's pretty easy. Okay, first things first, let's just plug in our textures the same way we've done it for all the other projects so far. So I'll go to my material. So I'll select everything and delete it. And then I'll open up my textures folder. And these names are kind of long. We can probably shorten these. So I can see this one's called RenderCrate-Spaceship-PCC Raven-Base Color. I'm going to press F2 and I'm just going to rename this Spaceship Base Color. Spaceship Emissive. This one is the metallic map. This one is the normal map. Now some of them have things that you haven't seen yet before, like this one's called Spaceship Mask Second Color. We'll talk about that when we get to it. Okay, that's going to make it a little bit easier. Okay, let's drag our base color, emissive, metallic, normal, and roughness into our material graph, and we'll plug these in. Now, something you'll notice about virtual textures, sometimes the thumbnails are kind of glitchy. They're just black. It is working, it's just that the thumbnails are kind of weird. So you're going to have to click on it and then read the little name right here to know which map it is. So this one is the base color. I'll just plug it in there. This one is the emissive, so I'll plug it into emissive color. This one is metallic. This one is roughness, and this one is normal. Let's go ahead and press save, and we'll take a look at the result. Now, it looks kind of weird, but I can tell you why. It's because I forgot to change the sRGB value on some of these textures. So this is what will happen if you don't do that. It looks really dark, doesn't quite look right. So I'm actually going to delete all my textures out of the graph, and then I'm going to go back to my textures folder, and I'm going to search for the mask, metallic, and roughness. Let's right click and go Asset Actions, Edit Selection and Property Matrix, and we'll uncheck sRGB for those textures. Now, this ship was made in Blender, so that means that the normal map is also backwards. So let's double click on the normal and search for the word green and turn on the flip green channel, and we'll press save. Okay, so now we're ready to drag all those textures into the material graph. We'll come back for that masked texture in a little bit. Okay, let's just plug these all in again, then we'll press save, and then we'll check out our results, and we can see this looks a lot better. This is much closer to what I was expecting. Now, we have a problem. What if we want to change the shininess of the model? We want to change the paint color. Maybe we want to change the glowing color and intensity on the back of the ship. And let's say we're sending this model to a team member, so we don't want them to have to fiddle with this node graph. We just want to give them some controllers. Or maybe you're not working on a team, maybe you're working alone on a project, but you just want to be able to art direct your scenes really quickly. You just want to get them set up and then fiddle with some knobs and sliders to dial in the look of your scene. We're going to do that using material instances. So the first thing I want to do is go into my spaceship folder, and let's rename this material MM for master material _ spaceship. And then we'll right click and go to create material instance. And we'll name this one MI for material instance _ spaceship. Let's hit Control Shift S to save everything. And we actually want to assign the material instance to the model, not the master material. So let's click and drag material instance spaceship onto the model. Now you shouldn't see any difference yet, but we will soon. Okay, let's open up the master material, MM spaceship, and we're going to try to go with best practices here because we're going to pretend like we're working on a team. And again, even if you're not working on a team, you still want to be able to open up this project later and understand how you set it up so that you're not fighting against your future self. So let's organize this, kind of untangle all the spaghetti. Okay, now we're going to create some controllers so we can adjust the intensity and brightness, contrast, tint, and so on of all these different maps. Let's start with just the color channel. So I'll move all these away and we'll zoom into color. And the first thing I want to do is set up a slider for brightness. So I'm going to right click and search for the word multiply, and I'm going to control click and drag this node and plug it into multiply. And then I'll plug the color into A. So now the color is being multiplied by 1. Now if you multiply anything by 1, it ends up just being the same, so we're not going to see any difference. But if I want to darken it, I can multiply it by 0, and now the color becomes black, because when you multiply something by 0, it just becomes 0. If I want to darken it but not all the way, I can multiply it by 0.5, and now the color is just darker. Or if I want to brighten it up, I can multiply it by 2. Now, like I said, I want to create a slider. I don't want to have to do this manually inside my node graph. So let's create something called a scalar parameter. We do that with the hotkey, holding down S and clicking, and then we get a scalar parameter. Let's name this color brightness. We'll set the default value to 1 so it doesn't mess up our color map, and plug that in. Now, because we made this a parameter, it's going to be exposed in our material instance. So what does that mean? Well, let's save the master material and let's open up the material instance. Remember, the instance is what's applied to the spaceship. So when you go into material instance, you don't see the full node graph. It's really simplified and user-friendly. If I go here where it says global scalar parameters, I can open this up and we have this little checkbox that says color brightness. We can check that. And then if I click and drag on this, we can lighten up or darken the spaceship with just a slider, which is really cool. If you want to set it back to default, just click on this little arrow right here. And if you don't want this to be edited, you want to lock it as the default so no one can mess with it, just uncheck this box and now it's just going to be the default. Cool, so it's working. Let's press save and let's set up a bunch of other controls. Let's go back into the master material and now let's do a contrast. So to do contrast, we want to search for a node called power, or actually the hotkey, if you don't want to type the word power, is to hold down E and click. So I'm going to hold down Control and I'll grab this little noodle and plug it in right there. And then I'll route the multiply node into the power node. And let's also create another scalar parameter. So I'll hold down S and click. We'll call this one color contrast. We'll set the default value to 1 so it doesn't mess with our project, and plug it in. Nice. Let's press apply and save. Now I want to create a tint. So to tint, I'm going to multiply. The hotkey is to hold down M and click. So we get a multiply node. Let's reroute that like before. And instead of creating a scalar parameter, I want to create just a color picker basically. So the hotkey for that is to press 3. Let's plug this into B and we'll plug this node here into A. Now by default, this is not a parameter, which means it's not exposed to the material instance. So we need to right click and go convert to parameter. And we'll call this color tint. And I want to set the default value in this little box right here to white. Again, that way it doesn't mess with our material. But if I want to tint it later, I can open this up and tint it red, or maybe we want our spaceship to be blue or green, but make sure the default value is white. Lastly, I want to create a saturation slider. So I'm going to right click and search for saturation, and it looks like they only have desaturation. That's okay, we can work with that. So let's click and drag this to here, and let's press S to create another scalar value. We'll call this color saturation. We'll set our default value to 1. Now, if we set the value to 1, this is actually going to desaturate it. But I feel like it's more user-friendly and intuitive if the higher the number, the more saturated it is, rather than the higher the number, the less saturated it becomes. So I actually want to invert this before it goes into this input. The hotkey for the invert node is O. So 1 minus X is invert. Okay, so here's all of our color controls set up. Let's just do some organizing by selecting these top nodes here, and I'll hit Shift W to stack them vertically. Let's do these bottom nodes here and do the same thing. And let's also organize this by selecting everything and pressing C for comment, and I'll just call this one base color. So now we have this group here that shows where all of our base color controls are. Now really quickly before we move on, I want to show you one other organizing thing. So if I save this and I open up my material instance, I can see that we have color brightness, color contrast, color saturation, and color tint, but they're not grouped together. They're in these weird groups called global scalar parameters, global vector parameters. I want to organize this better because it's not really intuitive or user-friendly to see these group names that are just kind of technical. So what we can actually do is select our parameters. So color brightness, color contrast, color tint, and color saturation. And here where it says group none, we can give it a name, base color. Now when we save and jump back over to our material instance, we can see that they're all grouped under this little group called base color, which is really nice and easy. Okay, cool. Let's move on to the next one. So the next one is metallic. The metallic channel doesn't really need too much. Let's just give the users a slider to turn off the metalness of the material so that it can be plastic or ceramic or something else other than metal. So for that, I'm just going to create basically a brightness slider the same way I did this one right here. In fact, we can actually duplicate this multiply node and this color brightness. Let's just rename it metalness intensity, and we'll reroute this through here, press apply. And now if I set my value here to 0, the ship is no longer metal. It's just kind of like a gray plasticky material. There's no more metal in the spaceship material. Now, metal should only be black to white. It shouldn't be less than 0 or more than 1. So if we want to get fancy with it, we can actually clamp this. It's up to you. It's not totally required, but I'm going to search for the word clamp, and I'll run this through here first, and we'll clamp these values at 0 and 1. Cool. Now let's grab this parameter metalness, and you can see it's still in the group called base color because we just duplicated this one from up above. So let's put this in a new group called metalness. Let's also select these nodes and press C for comment, and we'll call this metalness. All right, moving quickly. This is nice, making good progress. So the next one down is specular color. I think for this one, I just want to create a brightness and a contrast slider. So I'm going to select these 4 nodes. Let's duplicate them, bring them down, and let's reroute this noodle through the power node here, plug this in here, and now we just need to change these names. So this is color brightness. I'm going to call this specular brightness. This one's called color contrast. I'm going to rename it to specular contrast. And then once again, both of these nodes are now in the base color group, but let's change them to the specular group. And then we'll select the nodes, press C for comment, and call it specular. Okay, next is roughness. Now again, roughness isn't color information, so it doesn't need tint or saturation. It just needs brightness and contrast, just like before. So once again, let's select these 4 nodes that we used to create the brightness and contrast sliders. Press Ctrl D, move this down towards the roughness map. I'm going to hold down Control to reroute the noodle right here, plug that into there, and then we'll just rename these. Roughness brightness, roughness contrast. We'll select these 2 parameter nodes and put them in a group called roughness. And then once again, we'll highlight our nodes here and press C for comment, and we'll name this group roughness. Okay, the next one down is emissive. Now, if you think about it, emissive is an actual color. It's not just a black and white value. And so for this one, I'm going to actually copy and paste all of the nodes we created to control the color map way up here at the top. So we'll select all these, Control D. I'll drag this way down to where the emissive lives. Let's Control click to unroute this and put it on the other side of desaturation here. We'll plug this in here on the front. We'll rename this to emissive brightness, emissive contrast, emissive tint, and emissive saturation. And then I'll select all 4 of my parameters. So that's the brightness, contrast, tint, and saturation. and we'll put this into a group called Emissive. Now, just through some trial and error, I realized that when it comes to the emissive channel, it kind of helps if you put the desaturation part before the tint part in the chain. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to Alt-click to disconnect this. So now desaturation is floating here. Let's Control drag this here. So now the tint part is going right into the material. And let's scoot the saturation in between like this, because it kind of helps to desaturate the glow of the engines before you add a different color. Because if I just tried to tint it red, it would conflict with the blue that's already there. So we want to desaturate it first and then change the tint. So now let's select all of these top nodes and hit Shift W to line them up. And then these bottom nodes here, Shift W, and we could try to compress this a little bit, organize it, make it look nice. Then we'll select all this, press C for comment, and we'll call this Emissive. Okay, we're almost done with this part. So last one is the normal map. So for this, I want to create a slider for normal intensity so that you can either smooth out the bumps or make them more extreme. So for that, I'm going to search for a node called flatten normal, and we'll reroute this like this. And then I'll create a scalar value called normal intensity. Now this is kind of a hint. The node that we're controlling is called flatten normal, but our parameter is called intensity. So the user is going to expect a bigger number to make the normals more intense. So I want to invert this before it goes into the flatness input. So we do that again by holding down O and running that through first. Now I want the default value to be 1. Let's press apply, and then we'll put this normal intensity into a group called normal. And then we'll select these nodes, press C for comment, and call it normal. Okay, let's test out our material and see what we ended up with. So we can actually close this window, and let's open up the material instance. So now you can see we've got these nice organized groups right here inside the material instance, and we can start messing around with them. So if I go to base color, I've got these 4 controls. I can turn on color brightness and lighten it or darken it. Let's just press this arrow to go back to the default value. I've got color contrast, which does a very similar thing, but it's more of a contrast thing. If we increase the brightness and the contrast, we get a really sharp image like that. Set those back to default. We've got color saturation, so if I go down to 0, it becomes a black and white image. It kind of looks like it's got color, but that's just because it's reflecting this green stuff. Let's just move it up and out of the way. Now if I set the color saturation to a negative number, it's actually going to invert the image. And if I go to a higher number than 1, it's going to oversaturate it until it becomes really crazy like this. So let's just be careful with that. Set it back to default. We've got color tint, so we can tint the entire model. Pretty cool. Next, we've got the emissive channel. So I can increase the emissive brightness to make it really glowy. Emissive contrast probably doesn't do a whole lot, but you can mess with it if you want to. Now, like I said, if we try to tint it first, the red is going to conflict with the blue and it just kind of cancels out. So before you tint your emissive, you probably want to go to saturation and set it to 0. Now we can tint it whatever color we want. So let's go for a kind of an orangey red glow, and we can also increase the brightness of it. So now we got a flaming orange engine. Pretty cool. Let's set these back to default. For metalness, we basically just have a slider, which allows us to turn off the metalness of the material if we want to. Next, we have the normal intensity. For this, I'm going to get a little bit closer to the model. If I set this to 0, the material gets a little bit smoother, and if I set it to 2, it should get bumpier. In fact, I can keep cranking this up, and the model will become really crunchy looking until it kind of breaks. So that's just going to help you refine the surface of the model a little bit. Next, we got roughness. Roughness brightness. If I increase the roughness, the model's going to become less shiny. If I decrease it to 0, it's going to become like a mirror. We can also increase the roughness contrast so that the grimy parts look extra grimy and dusty. Cool, we'll set that back to default. And lastly, we have specular, so we can increase the brightness of the specular and the contrast. Very cool. So you can actually stop there if you want. We gave ourselves a lot of control, but now I want to show you how to use that mask texture to change the color of the paint on the model. So this is really cool. We're going to get even more advanced here though. So I'm going to jump back into my master material, and I'm going to grab the texture called Spaceship Mask Second Color. Let's drag and drop that into the scene. So I want to be able to change the color of the paint. And right now it's purple. So what this mask does for us is mask off where the paint is on the model. Let me show you what that looks like. So if I plug the mask into the base color temporarily and press apply, we can see that anywhere that has paint is white and anywhere that doesn't have paint is black. So we can mask it off. So let's just plug the original color map back in. So I want to blend our original color map with a color picker using this mask. So to do that, I'm going to press L, which creates a lerp node. Now lerp is short for linear interpolate, which is long for blend. So it's just a blend node. So I'm going to go to my base color here, and I'm going to grab the output of the last node in the chain and plug it into A. And then I want to be able to pick the paint color on the fly. So I'm going to press 3 to grab a color picker and plug that into B. And then this texture is the mask. So we'll plug this into alpha and just kind of arrange this so it looks a little better. And we'll plug this finally into base color. We can organize this later, but let's just test it really quick by picking a totally different color other than purple. Let's do like green and press OK. Now we can see over here that the paint color seems to be changing. Let's save it, and you can see on our model, we now have green paint. Very cool. So this is good. I want to do some organization to make this fit into our system, but I also want to be able to change the shininess of the paint. It'd be really cool if we could do that too. But first, let's do some organization. So I need to create a parameter with this. Let's right click, convert it to a parameter, and we'll call this paint color. And let's choose a default color. It kind of doesn't matter which one you pick. Let's just kind of pick a similar one to the one that was already on the model. And let's put this in the group called paint. We'll make a separate group just for the paint. Okay. Now I want to be able to adjust the roughness and the shininess of the paint itself. So maybe we want the paint to be really dry looking, or maybe we want it to be really wet and shiny. I want a slider to allow me to do that. And what that means is I'm going to be using this mask over and over. And I don't really want multiple copies of it. I also don't want to draw these noodles all over my graph, kind of going across my graph like this. So let me show you a really cool little trick to help you organize things. If you double click on the noodle, which is flowing from our mask into the alpha input here, you create this little node that helps you organize things, which is pretty cool in and of itself. So if this mask was back here and I didn't want it to be flowing diagonally through the color, I could create these little reroute nodes to make it visually make more sense. But even cooler, what you can do is right click on this node and say convert to named reroute. And now we've created this little teleporter where it's flowing from this node and ending up here. Let's go ahead and name this though. We'll call this paint mask. Now what's really cool is we can delete this, and anytime we need to use that paint mask, we can just right click and search for paint mask, and we get that little node. You can have multiple copies of it, and it's all just flowing from this back here. In fact, let's just put this into a little group and call it masks. Nice. All right, let's keep going. Next is Specular. So let's just repeat that process. I'll press L for lerp. I'll reroute this last node right here into the lerp node. We'll plug this into A. I'll press S for a scalar parameter, and we'll call this paint specular. Let's set the default value to 1 so that it has some shine to it. Plug that into B, and then I'll search for my paint mask and plug that into alpha. And then I'll just scooch this group out like that. So now it's inside the group. Oh, and don't forget to put your paint specular parameter into the paint group over here. All right. Now we've got roughness, emissive, and normal next. We don't actually need to do emissive or normal for the paint. So I'm just going to work on the roughness one. So this is going to be really quick. Let's just select these 3 nodes from the specular one that we just did. Duplicate those. We'll reroute the end of the roughness chain into this lerp node right here. Plug that in like that. Let's change this one to paint roughness, and we'll set the value to 0.5. So it's got a little bit of a shine, but not too much. Oh, and again, don't forget to check to make sure that the paint roughness parameter is in the paint group over here on the left. Okay, that was pretty crazy. This looks like a pretty complicated material. But if we save it and we open up our material instance, we now have a new section called paint. I can turn on paint color, and I can change it right here, make it a little bit lighter maybe. We can increase or decrease the roughness to make it more shiny. So now the paint is like a mirror, and we have full control over everything. Nice. Now one last little thing to show you the true power of material instances. Let's say we want 2 ships, and we want them to be different colors. Well, right now, we can't. If I change the paint color, it changes on both of them. But if I want a green ship, I'll just set it to green, press OK. And then right here, I'll click on Save Sibling. Let's call this MI Spaceship _ green. And then we'll set that back to default, save it. And once we look in our folder, we see we have another material instance called MI Spaceship Green. I can drag and drop that onto this spaceship, and now we have 2 different color spaceships. And they're still linked to that master material, so if I want to add more controls for myself in the future, those new controls will appear on both of our material instances, the purple one and the green one. But I can make changes on the material instances separately. So anything I do in the master material will propagate down into all of the children. So hopefully this gets you started and gives you tons of cool ideas for ways to create cool materials in Unreal Engine. Now, Unreal Engine materials are incredibly complex and incredibly powerful. So if you have any cool tips for me for ways that I could do these things differently, or maybe new ideas for controllers for my materials, be sure to leave a comment, because I'm always looking to improve my workflow. And if you learn something and you do something cool with this, be sure to share it with us on our Discord or tag us on Instagram with it. All right, later, creators.